The video is right there. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Allegedly. Ladies and gentlemen, today we debate whether we should believe in fairy stories, whether we should live in a world which blinds itself to scientific fact, whether we should live among those who would kill for unsubstantiated beliefs. Today, I propose the motion that this House would prefer to live in a world without the concept of the afterlife. As I am first proposition, I shall define this motion. This motion discusses the value of the belief in the afterlife. I shall define the afterlife as it is defined by the majority of the population. The world, a life after death through which you gain entry through your beliefs and actions. The most common example would be Christian heaven. In this debate, I shall reveal, using logic and clear fact, that not only would the world be safer and more tolerant without the concept of the afterlife, it would be more moral and reasonable too. My 3 points are: number 1, that historically the idea of the afterlife has caused more war than joy; number 2, that the afterlife takes from our current life; and number 3, that morally the idea of the afterlife is problematic for society. Number 1, that the afterlife has caused more war than joy. Nothing in the history of the earth has caused so much war and hardship as the religious disagreement of the afterlife. How to get there, what happens and who greets you if you do get there. Questions which might seem innocuous in the light of day have caused wars which have taken countless lives. Crusaders who killed Muslims, the Inquisition who tortured and murdered its victims, Hitler's German Christians. In history, religion has been used to justify brutal invasions and mass murder countless times. If someone does not believe in the afterlife and by extension your God, then they become different to you. Less relatable, less human. The brain finds it unnervingly easy to justify oppressing or harming a group of people who are other, who do not conform to your beliefs. The afterlife has caused death and subjugation of those seen as ungodly because of this. Why would we prefer to live in a world hypercharged with religious violence over a peaceful world without the concept of the afterlife? I'm not naive enough to think that the afterlife is the only cause of war in the world, but it's a big part of it. If this House chooses to live in a world without the afterlife, there would be an immediate end to, for example, suicide bombers who think their horrific deeds gain them entry to heaven. The opposition will tell you how we should prefer the afterlife because it comforts the families of those who have died. But to them I ask you, what about those who died because of this belief? What about their families? When choosing between a concept and saving human lives, it should be a simple choice. Without this catalyst for violence, the world would be a more peaceful and tolerant place. Do not let these people die on the altar of your belief. Number 2, that the afterlife takes from our current life. Let's imagine for a moment that the afterlife does exist. Okay, what then? Well, ladies and gentlemen, contrary to what the opposition will have you believe, everything is not peachy keen if we decide that this life is just a blip on our mortal journey. When you get an injection, does the knowledge that the pain is only temporary and for the greater good make it any less physically unpleasant? No. Suffering is suffering, no matter the reason or the result of it. If people had a reason to believe that this life wasn't all that they had, imagine all the suffering that will come as a result of it. No one would have any incentive to do anything. We would why spend your life searching for the cure for cancer if everyone is just going to live anyway? You know, should we just say tough luck, see you later to the child dying of cancer? Yes.
But do you not agree that, like, in the world we live in right now, there's still a concept of an afterlife, and there are a lot of people who believe in that who are still searching for the.
I will address that later, but saying that we prefer to live in a life with the concept of the afterlife legitimizes it and normalizes it. But I will address that later in my speech. Preferring this concept, creates a race of lazy, selfish and apathetic people. The world is better off without its edging softened by the promise of the afterlife. Yes, there is suffering and adversity too, but there is determination too to find an end to it. The people are people now who spend their lives in pursuit of a larger goal. If this life is all you have, then the happiness you feel right now is more valuable. There is far too much beauty and wonder in the world to simply kill time waiting for greener pastures, which may very well never materialize. Okay, number 3, that legitimizing the afterlife will be damaging to society. Our society relies on human morality. However, the concept of the afterlife interferes with this structure. It puts our morality on hold. If the opposition were to get their way, they would be supporting the notion of the afterlife. In doing so, they would be normalizing it and legitimizing it. In the world where belief in the afterlife is now commonplace, we would not see citizens dedicating their lives to developing our society, because the afterlife negates the immediacy of moral responsibility. And I'm training to be a social worker because I want to help those in need. But if we believe that everyone prospers on the other side, would we bother helping out these people? We would not be morally compelled to. What about those who take their own lives because they believe in this supported concept, because they believe that they would just move on to heaven? We would not be able to condemn them. What about the people who engage in mercy killings for the sick because they believe that they're just speeding on the journey onto the next life? By supporting this opposition, you're basically supporting their actions. Society would fall apart if we gave more legitimacy to the concept. We must prefer to live in a society driven by morality, a world run by teachers who want to impart an education, social workers who want to feed the hungry, and doctors who actually want to save the dying. People who want to value the experience of this life above all else. If this house prefers to live without the concept of the afterlife, then people will feel compelled to do good. We will recognise the immediate and constant need to act morally, and our societal structure would remain intact. When we decide what world we want to live in, number one, remember my points. Remember one, that the afterlife, without the afterlife, there will be more peace. Number two, that the afterlife takes from our current life. And number three, that it suspends our morality, damaging society. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here not to discuss the validity of the opposition's superstition, but rather to decide what world we would prefer. A world where morality is suspended and our minds are constrained, or a world of freedom of thought, multiple ceasefire, a world infused with the urgency to do good. If we have faith, ladies and gentlemen, let it be in ourselves, in humans' irrational but persistent desire to do good. Let us prefer to live in this world because it is all we have, and because we have made it enough. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Maria for that fine speech to open the final of Maidens 2018, and now I'd like to call on Claire Lemass to open the case for the opposition.
Very close. Good afternoon, chairperson, adjudicators, members of the proposition, opposition, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today to strongly oppose the motion that this House would prefer a world without the concept of an afterlife. Now, there are a multitude of reasons why the world we currently live in is far better than this world proposed by the proposition, but I would like to focus on three main points. How that a world without this concept would be much less enriched by arts and developments, how this concept enforces the law of karma, and how it helps people when dealing with bereavement. Before I start off my speech, I'd like to rebut one or two things that Maria has said on the other side of the House. For example, you continuously went on about this idealist, or this world that we would create, but we are currently living in a world where the concept of an afterlife exists. The world that you're talking about is the one we're living in, and in the one we're living in, there's developments being made every day. There's people doing good every day. The points that you're saying is about our current world, and we still have developments. I'd also like to point out the fact that religious wars have been more so about power and wealth and tribes trying to assert their power. And suicide bombers, they are a result of people higher up in a religious community taking advantage of the fact that people feel so strongly about the afterlife, about the fact that people believe so strongly in the afterlife. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to imagine a world without the ancient Egyptian pyramids. Imagine those mesmerizing monumental tombs built almost 4,500 years ago never existed. Imagine a world where Michelangelo never painted the Sistine Chapel. Imagine his composition, the masterpiece, 400 years ago he painted it. Imagine that never existed. For all you mathematicians and engineers in the room, imagine Johannes Kepler never invented the laws of planetary motion. Laws which, invented 400 years ago, still stand today. Laws which changed humanity's understanding, fundamental understanding of the universe, the orientation of the planet. Imagine this just never happened. This is the world that the proposition is inviting you to join. You see, the pyramids would not exist without the concept of an afterlife. These tombs were created to send their pharaohs and the queens from earthly life to afterlife. Michelangelo would not have created his magnificent work because it was as a direct inspiration from the heavens and God. And Kepler, without the concept of an afterlife and God, would not have developed his laws, as he felt it his duty to do God's work while on earth. You see, Maria, people who believe in an afterlife feel that it is their duty to do God's work, or whoever their higher powers' work is, on earth. Yes?
With your permission, what about the thousands of people, slaves who died building the pyramids? They were sacrificed to this idea of the afterlife.
I completely agree with you, Maria. This is another example of people taking advantage of weakness. This isn't just religious. They're using the term religion to deem what they're doing is all right. Slavery exists for a multitude of reasons. It didn't just happen because of religion. It existed in America. This is just one of the reasons. This is one of the terms they put on it. The world, it's clear that belief in the afterlife inspires people to create, to develop, to learn. And while you personally may not believe in it, to remove this concept is to remove these discoveries, these works of art, these wonders from yours and everyone else's lives. Our world is better with these understandings. It is better with Michelangelo's art because he brings a unique beauty, inspiration, and expression to the world. It is better with the pyramids because they stand as a testament to the power of mankind and prove we are capable of creating wonders. It is better with Kepler's law because they quench our inherent thirst for knowledge and understanding. It is a better world than one without the concept of an afterlife. Next, let's discuss the law of karma. The idea of karma, that doing good things will cause good things to happen to you or will allow you to reach your desired afterlife, is found in people of all walks of life, regardless of whether they have religious or atheist views. While some believe in an afterlife to the soul's existence to another world, others believe in reincarnation, the concept that it will be a direct result of conduct during life is shared amongst all understandings. Again, the proposition has said that, if we had this concept of the afterlife, people wouldn't work. But it is a direct result of conduct during life that will justify whether you get in or get into your desired afterlife. Although the proposition may think that good just should be done for the sake of doing good, this notion is incredibly naive. Just because we in this room decide that everyone should be good doesn't mean everyone will be good. But the concept of an afterlife encourages people who may not necessarily do good just for the sake to embrace their moral, virtuous qualities. All religions have the concept of an afterlife, and while 84% of people subscribe to a certain religion, 32% of atheists believe in an afterlife of some form. The afterlife is believed by those without religious beliefs. Even though our Western societies are becoming less and less religious, the belief in some form of afterlife still exists on a large scale, and thus the acts of doing good will still be perpetuated in our society. This covers both the short and long-term effects of the concept of an afterlife in our society. Maria, sometimes people need to believe in something else before they can believe in themselves. Well, belief in an afterlife does just that for a large proportion of our society, for the aforementioned reasons. So why does the proposition want to take away this belief? A world with the concept of an afterlife has more people doing good than a world without this concept. And it's simple, really. I want to live in a world where more people do good. So I want to live in a world with the concept of an afterlife. Now, I'd like to move on to my final point. We've all known someone who has tragically died before their time. We've all known mothers or fathers as young as 30 years old, brothers, sisters, best friends, suffering from terminal diseases like cancer. The pain they've suffered is unimaginable. Not only were they in pain from their diseases, but they were also pained by the fact that they had reached the end of their life, even if they only had the chance to live a few years. Facing and accepting death is hard at any age, but is it exceptionally more devastating when someone so young must face it? And we all know there is more pain associated with than that. They had to face saying goodbye to their children, their families. They had to cope with leaving us, and we had to cope with their absence. I'm not, but sometimes the concept of an afterlife helps. It helps to mourn a short life. It helps when saying goodbye to your loved ones because maybe something more exists. Maybe they'll still get to watch over their families, and maybe they'll still be with us. Perhaps in the next life they won't have to suffer the unbearable pain they went through. And for us left behind, maybe some of us can get some peace in the possibility that they're somewhere better, that they'll still hear us when we talk to them, that they'll still listen. I'm not saying the concept of an afterlife removes pain, but for some people, it lightens the heavy load of hurt that grieving a loved one always brings. It is a concept that offers comfort to a wife of a soldier who died at war, or to the parents who had to bury their 7-year-old son. The idea that their lives are not over, but rather renewed somewhere else. Ladies and gentlemen, not everyone has to believe in the concept, but a world without this concept is far worse than the world we live in today. So it is not a world I want to live in. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dave for that fine speech. Before I call upon the next speaker, the winning tweet so far, and winning solely because it's the only tweet, is from Hugh, and it's "I'm in heaven every time I look in Ronan's eyes." All I'm going to say is, Hugh, I thought I said to put inappropriate content on a private page. The other thing from that.
So I'm going to bring you one argument in this whole debate, that the proposition's sense of modern morality, our understanding of right and wrong, is the way it is today as a direct consequence of the afterlife. I'm going to do this under 5 headings. Firstly, going to start characterising the afterlife, which will be difficult because I'm alive. But secondly, characterising the relationship between people and the concept of the afterlife. Third, looking at the importance of the afterlife in its development of moral values. Why the afterlife is so central to the spread of these moral values. And fifthly, what would the modern world look like without it? So to characterise the afterlife, the most common concept of the afterlife represented through history is the one in the Abrahamic religions. So it's a perfect place, as characterised already, a perfect place you go after you die where you get to be with God. Then secondly, so we can characterise the relationship between people and the afterlife. So as already brought up, there's a core concept in Abrahamic religions that thy will be done on earth as is in heaven. The idea that you bring God's will onto earth. It's directly from the Lord's Prayer. It brings a central connection between the concept of the afterlife and how people were motivated to make the world a better place. So how does this happen? Third point, how are people's motivations changed by the concept of the afterlife? I'm going to do a characterization of the early Christians, who were the people who came up with our modern idea of the afterlife. So Judeo-Christian morality was formed from the very lowest of society. You have groups of poor, powerless farmers and fishermen who were persecuted by the Romans. This had a huge impact on their concept of what a perfect afterlife would look like. There would be equality, a concept that benefits these poor first century Christians. A perfect world was one where the Romans didn't have all the power and the wealth, but it was instead redistributed. Second, you have the concept of forgiveness. In the Lord's Prayer we see it. If you forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. These impoverished people no doubt had to commit crimes to stay alive and to eat. And they sought to forgive, and they sought forgiveness of the Romans for these crimes. Thirdly, that tolerance is a core concept of a perfect afterlife. Christians and Jews were persecuted by the Romans because their beliefs contradicted the Roman rule. In a perfect afterlife, in a perfect world, we have tolerance of free thought. We also see this in the Islamic call to prayer, Allah Rahim, which is God is great and God is merciful. So from this analysis, we can see that there's a central part of the idea of the concept of the afterlife became forgiving people and making the world a more tolerant, merciful, equal place. As you know, we have to do the will of God on earth as it is in heaven. And it was people's duty to do his will on earth. Yes?
So moral standing from religions can still exist without the exact concept of an afterlife, which involves judgment and justice.
Okay, conveniently, my next point is why the afterlife is so central to the spread of Judeo-Christian morality. So, which is exactly this. So does anyone recognise these values? Equality, forgiveness, tolerance. These are essentially the moral values that make up liberal Western morality, the moral system that the proposition are using to judge their impacts. Obviously the Christians weren't the first group of people to be oppressed and come up with these moral values, but they were the first people to make these moral values a core concept of their afterlife, which suggests to me that the afterlife plays some role in their perpetuation. My central point in this debate is that without the concept of the afterlife, this value system that we have today, which is born from Judeo-Christian morality, would never have been popularized or lasted so long for it to become the status quo. It would have died out like any other value system in history that didn't benefit the rich and powerful, and here's why for the following 5 reasons. Firstly, as brought up, increased compliance. Christians believe that not complying with ideas like tolerance and forgiveness means that you have sinned and therefore God may judge you in the afterlife. Secondly, it appeals to people who aren't in power. An afterlife in which God presents a world of tolerance and equality is very appealing to a group of oppressed a group of oppressed people by powerful rulers, which leads to widespread popularity amongst non-powerful groups because non-powerful groups make up the majority of society. So the afterlife causes a huge spread of these moral values. Thirdly, it creates a vision of what the world could be like. The idea of the afterlife as a perfect world that sort of actually exists, that we can actually get to, makes the utopian idea of what a Christian perfect world would look like actually achievable, which means that the Christians are more prone to spreading their religion and thus their value system, to do God's will on earth as it is in heaven, thus impose their value system. Fourthly, presents those in power from viewing themselves as better. So Judeo-Christian concept of the afterlife represents the part of religion that all sinners are equal in God's judgment. It undermines the idea that wealth and power make you a better person, and thus goes against the hierarchical, corrupt structures that often have misrepresented religious beliefs in the past. Fifthly, is that the concept of the afterlife, without the concept of the afterlife, it's extremely difficult to popularize these views. Judeo-Christian values, as we essentially uphold today, don't benefit those in power who dislike equality, because it means that they have to redistribute their wealth, and they don't get to keep their position of status they have before. How many times have we seen powerful rulers oppress a group whose views contradict their leadership in order to maintain the status quo? So, finally, fifth point is, how has the afterlife had an impact on the modern world? Well, what happens when you have millions of people thinking that in heaven they are the same, they are all equal, and God will treat them the same? Well, they start to bring these values to earth. With millions and millions of people upholding Judeo-Christian values, this eventually becomes the status quo. There's a complete moral inversion in society as a consequence of the afterlife perpetuating these moral beliefs. It's not the importance of the afterlife itself, but it's the importance of what the afterlife did to perpetuate these moral values that we now hold as so important in modern society. By the time we enter the 20th century, people have started having these values, before they even know where they came from, and from this is born liberal Western modern morality. That almost all this country upholds today. We have a value system almost identical to that of the first century Christians. And you may question that, saying, with sort of pro-life and marriage inequality movements, to say that those aren't core concepts of Christian morality. Things like equality and tolerance those are sort of misrepresented hierarchical beliefs that anyone who's in the institution of power will present. Does anyone want to imagine a world without these core values? We still have racism, misogyny, and slavery, like the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks did. We wouldn't have had the civil rights movement. Our understanding of the afterlife is based on these values, which would be long gone from the world if the concept of the afterlife hadn't kept it there. To summarize, the concept of the afterlife is what popularized values like inequality and tolerance in Judeo-Christian morality. The afterlife prevented them from being subdued by powerful rulers and allowed everyone else to latch onto these values. Nowadays, these values have become such a central part of our moral framework that we forget where they came from, and it was because of this that the concept of the afterlife they came at all. The proposition will tell you a lot of true things tonight, but none of them are as important as this. And that is simply because all their judgments about why their impacts are bad are effectively as a consequence of the afterlife giving them the moral structure that they currently have. On that, I urge you to oppose the motion. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Ben for that fine speech, and I'd now like to call upon Lord Egan to continue the case of this proposition.
So good evening everyone. Today I'm here to strongly propose the motion, so I'm going to bring to you some rebuttal, and I'm going to bring to you two main points about how, contrary to what opposition have been telling us, belief in an afterlife does not lead to better behaviour for society, and the threat of punishment in the afterlife. But first I'm going to start with that rebuttal. So opposition have been talking about how there is better culture because of our belief in the afterlife and the wonderful pyramids and paintings we have. We believe that the belief in afterlife often comes with certain criteria to reach heaven, and one of these is often belief in a particular God. And the problem with this is that this leads to well-intentioned people trying to convert others. And in the past, this has led to a lot of certain religions and cultures. So we believe that belief in the afterlife has often cut out a lot of important cultures in the world because people are converted in these ways. And we believe that, therefore, this can have a bad impact on individuals and the cultures, and it leads to less diversity of culture. So now I'm going to get into my first point, that belief in the afterlife does not lead to better behaviour for society. So the problem with getting into this afterlife on a basis of merit is that better is tainted by strict religious codes that evolved many years ago and don't necessarily reflect the values held today. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the access to heaven. So if we accept that access to heaven is based on prescribed morality of particular religions, we can see that there can be conflict between the rules of these religions and our own modern beliefs in this world. So those who behave according to the rules that have been preset are rewarded for this. However, this leads to people being punished for doing what they feel is right in a given circumstance due to the lack of grey areas in these rules that have evolved. And we feel that this can be quite dangerous because these people or their families can believe that they are going to suffer for this in hell, and eternity is a very long time to be punished. So we believe that religion and religious morality have been used, as has been mentioned earlier, to justify acts that have caused great harm. So it is not what we want to do to have this afterlife based on your prescribed morality and acting in a certain way, because what is seen as good by a certain religion may not be good for society as a whole in today's world. So even if we accept that it was based on a more flexible morality, and let's just say for a moment it is based on what you personally believe is right, this still leads to problems, because individuals can believe that they have been good. It just depends on what they believe in that case. So they will get rewarded for this. But the problem is humans are incredibly capable of justifying their actions even when they are wrong and harm society as a whole. So in that case, heaven does not necessarily reward people who have had a positive impact on society as a whole, but rather people who think they have. And once again, this is a difficult concept because everyone is biased and people don't like to think that they are doing what is wrong. People generally like to have a better opinion of themselves. And unfortunately, that means they can justify their own beliefs in order to say that that will be what gets them to heaven. So on the other side, this system may also punish those who have helped humanity in what they perceive to be a bad way, where they think that the end does not necessarily justify the means, and where they have tried to take part in maybe social movements that are better here on earth, but maybe they believe are not what their religion strives for, and therefore they are blocking themselves from entrance to heaven. So now I'm going to move on to my second point, which deals a little bit more with this, the threat of punishment in the afterlife. So many religions, which has been largely ignored on the opposition, have some form of hell as well as some form of heaven in the afterlife. And the problem with this is opposition have been talking about how great it is to comfort the families by believing that maybe their loved ones are in a better place, or maybe there is some afterlife. But the problem is these are all based on if they behave in a moral way. As opposition have been saying, that's a great way to incentivize people to behave morally. But what about when people make mistakes? So if we accept that there is a hell, then there is a place of eternal torture, which is quite a long time to even imagine. With the afterlife, there is an opportunity of heaven, comes with the risk of hell. This is a huge reward, thinking of eternal paradise, but it is at a terrible risk. It is so long we can't even imagine it. However, without a concept of the afterlife, you're not conscious that you're missing out on anything. If life is just empty after that, there is no pain. You will not be aware that you are missing out. You will not feel cheated because you will not be conscious of this. And we believe it is better to have this kind of empty death than to risk a life of eternal pain. So this doesn't just apply to individuals not wanting this life of eternal pain, or even the risk of eternal pain. We also believe this applies to our loved ones, because it will be incredibly painful if we believe someone we know or love is going to live in hell. And we believe that this is such a large risk. We would be better off without any concept of the afterlife.
Information?
Yes.
At the end of, say if your loved one is dying at the end of their life, you're not talking to them on their deathbed being like, oh, you were bad for this and this. You're seeing the good in them and you're hoping that they're going to a better place. That's the concept, not the actual thing.
Yeah, I get that. You're hoping they go to a better place, but in the end, you don't know. And because there are so many different criteria for getting in there, you will hope in that moment that they are going to a better place. But the problem is, if you believe that certain people are going to hell, then you have to think about there are people out there who are living at the moment who will end up in hell. And I think that comes with an awful price for people to imagine the suffering of other people, even if they believe their loved ones have been good and are going to heaven. This does not mean that there won't be other people that they are also fond of who they believe have sinned in some way. Maybe they don't feel it's personally wrong, but maybe they believe that there is a religion that believes it is wrong because for whatever reason, even their sexuality may be perceived as a sin in certain religions. So we believe that this comes with an awful price. So we believe that, I'll just go on a little bit more about that. We believe that with no afterlife, there's no fear of being punished for who you are or for your loved ones being punished for who they are for eternity. We can make decisions that will improve our life and the lives of others in this world without the fear of all these consequences for eternity. We can make mistakes without fear of ending up in some kind of fiery pit in the future, and we can accept that we can move on from our mistakes without them being counted against us at the end of our lives. We will not be happy if all our decisions are based on fear that there will be some eventual judging of us, if we think that it is likely that there's a chance of hell. So today I've brought to you two main points that, despite what the opposition have said, the belief in an afterlife does not lead to better behaviour for society. It is just what one religion believes is better for society. and the threat of punishment in afterlife outweighs any possibility of a reward in the afterlife. So thank you for listening, and I beg you to propose.
Currently, from what I can see, the winning tweet so far seems to be from Breed, which is a tweet from The Good Place. And the nerdiest tweet so far comes from Luke Fennelly. I'm not even sure I can say that. But maybe I will at the end. Anyway, I'd like to call upon Maggie Larson to now close the case for the proposition.
Thank you for the floor. So as I've seen this debate so far, it's come down to kind of two main metrics, which are the effect of the concept of an afterlife on the behavior of individuals and how that benefits society as a whole. And the second is whether or not the concept of an afterlife gives meaning to life, or whether that's the primary meaning we should have in our lives. Like throughout human history, lots of cultures, most cultures in fact, have the concept of an afterlife. But the main function of this concept is to explain what happens after death and to provide comfort to families. The thing is, This is sort of maybe analogous to like the idea that the sun is like carried through the horizon by some guy with a chariot. Like it's an idea it's some sort of placeholder thing until we figure out what's really going on. It's not something that's really fundamental to us as people, like to the human race to have this idea of an afterlife. It's just sort of a story that we made up until we could find what's really going on. And realistically, we do kind of know what's really going on. There've been people who've looked into this because obviously death is scary, and we want to know what happens. And all the evidence suggests that there is no such thing as an afterlife. So this is the sort of thing that we can kind of determine through science. That was a very long introduction, but I'm going to bring you three main points now, which are that the net effect of the belief in an afterlife on human behavior is a negative one, detrimental to society. Second is it gives churches and other bodies undue authority over people. Third is that it's not necessary as a source of meaning. So I'd like to first talk about what Ben and Niamh have both brought up. What Ben mostly talked about was this, the morality and all the kind of moral structures that we see in society around us that we think are good things, like equality and democracy, come directly from our concept of like the Christian afterlife. So I think that's just completely not true. No, thank you, because that was true. But the thing is that the afterlife. We have no evidence to show the afterlife really exists. So it's not like these are kind of objective values that came down from the afterlife, but these are, we're projecting our own morality onto what we think the afterlife is going to be. And that morality is sort of inherent to people, probably, more so than it comes from the afterlife, because obviously we don't have actual information about what the afterlife is like. So it's really just a projection of our own morality onto an objective source, which is not in fact objective at all. So I think that really takes down most of Ben's argument. So first of all, I'd like to characterize how people's behavior is affected by belief in the afterlife. So it's been a bit of a dichotomy so far, where people are people are completely affected by their beliefs in the afterlife, or completely not. But actually, there are a lot of different factors and influences acting on human behavior. So there are things that come from kind of internal things, like wanting to be happy or altruistic motivations. But then there's social rewards, material rewards, laws and rules that exist in society. And then there's the threat of divine judgment or justice, or burning in hell for eternity. But that's kind of the thing that's more distant. And a lot of how much these things affect you depends on your power or powerlessness. As has been brought up already in the debate, if you are powerless in your society, if you're poor, if you're a serf or something working for a lord, you're more likely to believe in an afterlife because you think all the suffering that you've gone through is going to be worth something. But for the majority of people in the modern day, our standards of living are quite high, and as such, the belief in afterlife has gone down because we don't need it. So for most people, the heavenly reward has very little impact on our behavior. But what sort of person does the belief in afterlife constitute a significant portion of effect on their behavior? Well, it's religious extremists. So the stereotypical kind of people who are engaged in conversion camps or want to convert people, like missionaries who want to convert tribes and end up doing a lot of damage to their culture in the process, or terrorists, as has been brought up before, suicide bombers, who feel justified in judging people based on how they think they're going to be judged in the afterlife and sort of carrying out what they see as God's work, or suicide bombers who have the promise of 1,000 virgins waiting for them once they get to the afterlife. So I'd like to say that I think the idea from the opposition that good actions are mostly motivated by your belief in afterlife is just not true. For most people, their good actions kind of come from a place of either like altruism, which you called naive, but you know, I think the wanting to believe in afterlife just because it's nicer than the alternative is also like equally so. But I think, you know, it's generally true that people like do have altruistic motivations. No, thank you. People do have altruistic motivations for a lot of things. So, secondly, the belief in afterlife gives the church, I'm going to talk about the Catholic Church especially, an undue amount of authority over people. So, you know, the influence of the afterlife on people's behavior, yeah?
I think we live in a society where it's like fairly easy to opt out of religions and opt out of church if you don't want to. I think that most people who believe in the concept of an afterlife are very much opting and prescribing to these views by choice.
Yeah, no, that's quite true. But like throughout history, the church has had a lot of power over society and a lot of power over people, and like that has had a huge impact, which like still affects us today. So I think it is completely relevant. So like since the afterlife doesn't have a lot of impact directly on people's behavior, it's mostly by proxy through like church and state who are like influencing what the afterlife is going to be like, or not influencing, but interpreting for us and telling us. And that gives them a lot of authority because they are the ones who are telling us, well, this thing means you're going to go to hell, or this thing means you're going to go to heaven. So they get to decide what the afterlife is. And this, like, obviously, this power has been abused in the past, like the indulgences. We all remember junior cert history. And ideas to coerce, to threaten and exclude people. Yeah, I mean, like this threat of going to hell is kind of like corporal punishment. It can be effective, but it damages people. And that's why we don't use it anymore. And it can be extremely exploitative. You know, the idea of martyrdom is like, you know, convince people to kind of throw away their lives. You know, it's like, you know, people who don't believe in afterlife are much less likely to go to war, I'd say, just because they value their lives more if they think that they're not going to be reunited with their families afterwards. I'll just move on, because that's been addressed. But, well, actually, no, sorry. So a higher standard of living is correlated with less belief in the afterlife, which suggests that, like, the idea of the afterlife is something that is more necessary for people who are, like, oppressed or who are, you know, less advantaged in society. So the opposition talked about how the afterlife appeals to people without power. That's true, but it also, like, that's because it pacifies them. It means that they don't feel like they need to, like, gain this sort of power. It's like a placebo for real justice to believe that, oh, well, it's fine because in the next world we're going to get, like, our justice. Moving on to another point, it's not a necessary or good source of personal fulfillment, because it's really like when we deal with this incredible question of, like, you know, what happens when our life comes to an end, the easy answer is like, oh, well, we just keep living, but somewhere else. So it doesn't allow us to really confront, like, the really true question here of what happens after we die. And it doesn't give meaning to suffering, because you're just suffering for the sake of getting into, like, some exclusive club to, like, meet the criteria that someone else has set for you. You're not suffering to achieve personal improvement, which is a much more important meaning of life. So, so maybe if we valued life on Earth more, give Earth the glorification that we give heaven, save the planet that we live on, we'd be kinder to people, because there are no do-overs. Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Maggie for that fine speech. And we're now call upon the final speaker of the evening, Rooney, to close out the case of the opposition.
Okay, so I'm obviously opposing this motion, and I'd just like to start off with a little bit of rebuttal, and I'm going to integrate some of it, but there's just some stuff that I want to address first. And firstly, is that I think a lot of this has been sort of talked about, like on the proposition side, has been talking about, like, you know, the afterlife is the same thing as a belief in God, and so that means that it's bad because organized religion is evil. And, like, I also disagree with organized religion, but I think you can also separate the belief of an afterlife with the belief in a God, and then, like, dogmatic adherence to all the values of, like, an ancient church that you don't agree in. Like, I think you can still argue that belief in an afterlife is good without trying to equate it to the Crusades, which incidentally it's already been addressed that this was about wealth and power, but, like, they were just putting that out there, you know, history, we did that in history. But yeah, like, I don't think you can equate belief in an afterlife to belief, oh, this is really distracting, to belief in afterlife to belief in God, and therefore all the evils that the Crusades have caused, or just the church in general. And I think that a really interesting point that the proposition brought up was that I think it was third, probably I can't remember. Basically, they were like, okay, so even if belief in an afterlife causes bad morality, that's just going to mean people are walking around and saying, oh yeah, well this is what I think is right, I'm going to justify it now because this is what I think is right. Like, that is what morality is. Like, Plato didn't write the Republic just because he was like, oh, I think it would be fun. He wrote it because he thought it was the way that, you know, people should live. he wrote it because he thought it was the way people should live. And that's like Aristotle's Politics and all that kind of stuff, was because that is literally what morality is what people think is right. So trying to argue that the afterlife will just make people believe in whatever is wrong, because that's like, it doesn't stand up to logic, because that is literally the definition of morality. And that sort of brings me on to my first point, which is that like, it's not, no thanks, it's not about like the purity of morality, but the good actions that it takes. Like in debates, you don't judge by just because like morality is great. You have to look at the impacts that this argument is giving. And I don't think proposition have argued that like not believing in an afterlife would in actual fact have any kind of better impacts than believing in an afterlife. Because you can argue all you want about like what exactly living a good life entails, but that's kind of irrelevant when you talk about whether or not you believe what you're doing is right and good, just like divorced from an afterlife, or whether you believe what you're doing is right and good because of an afterlife. If you believe in an afterlife, you're more likely to do good things, and therefore that leads to more good things being put into the world, and therefore fundamentally belief in an afterlife is better for the world, because like all of the points the proposition have brought up are independent of the concept of an afterlife. They all rely on like the social structures of primarily the Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic religions, when like things like Buddhism has an afterlife because as like first characterized an afterlife as life after death, as I can't actually remember the exact wording, but it was life after death based on like the actions you take in real life, which is essentially the concept of karma and reincarnation. And like if you do good in life, you're going to get reincarnated into a good life, and that is something. No thanks. That is something that is completely separated from the like the socio-political structures that Prop are using to argue that belief in an afterlife is bad. And so therefore, it doesn't matter about like the purity of your morality, as long as what you're bringing into the world is something that brings in good things. And like I'm going to go into more detail about exactly what good things this brings, like what good things that the belief in an afterlife brings in. But I think like the first and most important one is that it makes people do good things. And like it doesn't matter if you're doing the good things because you don't want to go to hell, or you're doing the good things because you want to get into heaven. Like you are not killing people, you're not murdering people, like you are trying to bring more good into the world, whether it benefits you or whether it benefits the other person. More good has been brought into the world as a result of your belief in the afterlife. And I think it is a direct, I think it is a direct result of the belief in your afterlife. And I think like this is also all, this has been mentioned by like previous opposition members, but it is like relevant to my point, so I'm just going to bring it in, is that like people in this day and age choose to believe in an afterlife. Like I don't think you can stand up and argue that the church, that the church is still so powerful that like people are being forced into believing into an afterlife because like they just, that's how it is. No, people believe in an afterlife because they choose to believe in an afterlife, because they think that is the way that life should be. And so therefore, like you're still going to have a bunch of other people who don't believe in an afterlife, who like, they can either do good or bad things, and that is fundamentally relevant to the fact that if you choose to believe in an afterlife, then you are bringing good things into the world. And so therefore, like just purely on a mathematical level, if you believe in an afterlife, like there's good being born into the world. And that I think that, all the stuff that like propositions, like propositions brought into the argument about like, like people are going to do bad things as a result of an afterlife. Like people are going to do bad things anyway, but if you believe in an afterlife, you are also going to do good things. So therefore, like the positive impacts of believing in an afterlife are like super important. And I think that another like important part of believing in the afterlife is that it has basically been the catalyst for all of human development. And like Claire has talked about this in terms of arts, but I think it's kind of been neglected in terms of just science and philosophy. Basically is one of the most fundamental questions that people ask when they look at the world is that, what happens after I die? Like, is there anything after this? What am I going to do when all of this is gone? And I think that if you try and argue, like arguing that, firstly, to argue that a concept of the afterlife doesn't exist means that like people haven't even thought about that, because if you think about an afterlife and then reject it, the concept of an afterlife still exists in your world because you've actively rejected that. So to argue that a concept of an afterlife doesn't exist means that like you haven't even thought about that, and that is the first step that like humanity has taken towards, that's the first step that humanity has taken towards development. And so like in terms of weighing, I still think that, like the not killing people and the not like stealing from people is still more important. But this is, this is still fundamentally a huge part of humanity's development, is that like we'd still live without science if we didn't just question the world. And I think that the most important question that people ask is, what happens after I die? Therefore, that puts the concept of an afterlife into existence. And, oh shit, my time is gone. But, that's right. But I think that also another really important point is that like the afterlife could exist. like, I'm not going to stand up here and proselytize to you about whether or not I personally believe the afterlife exists, because, like, that's irrelevant. Is that it could exist because we have no fundamental proof that it doesn't. And I think it is fundamentally dishonest to, like, the human nature of questioning things is to argue that, no, like, we should just completely ignore this entire really important, like, thing that could happen after we die because we don't know that, just because we think it makes morality better. And I think I and, like, the rest of opposition bench have argued that it does make morality better if you believe in an afterlife. But I think, like, it is mostly just important to recognise that, like, it could exist. So why would we close our minds to the entire possibility of another life just because we wrongly believe that, like, it'll make morality pure or whatever, or, like, it mean the church won't oppress people? Because, like, both of those things are disconnected from the concept of an afterlife and the good it brings into the world. So, like, my main points here are that, like, purity of morality doesn't matter as long as it brings good impacts into the world, which, like, I think I've argued there. And, secondly, is that it has been the catalyst for most of human discovery is questioning what happens after we die. And then thirdly is that, like, we don't know if it's real or not, so why close our minds to that entire opportunity just out of a misguided attempt at making morality pure? So in conclusion, like, never proud to oppose this motion. Thanks.
I'd like to thank Ashley for that fine speech, and indeed I'd like to commend all our maidens for a really great debate, and we can deserve another round of applause. I'm now going to ask the old hacks in the back of the room to retire upstairs. When they're gone, we're going to put them on the floor.
Thank you. I tried to.
Stop, I saw myself and I was like, oh god.
I have a piece of paper. No, I was just like,
You intentionally misinterpreted.
it's so funny when this thing of like oppressive regime.
Okay.
That's why
That's why that's not what they said.
You guys were like lockdown as a religion, me and Maria just wrote a whole page of like
My point was that we don't get our meaning from the afterlife, but the afterlife allows our moral structures to perpetuate. But my consensus is the opposite. Pretty bad for me.
Sorry about delay. I would now like to put questions to the House. I hope all you guys are tweeting there. And so, on the motion that this House would live in a world without an afterlife, all those in favour say aye. Aye! And all those against? Nay. You guys are so the ayes have it, and the motion is carried. So now it's my turn to speak, not that I really have anything to say, but I do get essentially an unlimited amount of time because I'm a guest and you can't really tell them off. Although I do say here, we definitely didn't have this back in my day, is we asked that these speeches not exceed 10 to 12 minutes. That's very forceful. That's the kind of like powerful leader who oppresses a group that just disagrees with it kind of thing. So I guess like because I have this kind of unlimited time, it brings me to the real reason I'm here today, which is as a minister of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. No, it's not, unfortunately. The real reason I'm here is because I work in finance and I've sold myself to the devil, and in an attempt to redeem myself, I'm going to do some charity work. And what better charity work than giving noggins to students? So, I was actually so engrossed in the debate that I forgot the POIs. So I don't actually have an argument for best POI. Also, there weren't really any funny POIs, which is kind of what I was looking for. So instead, I'm just going to bring it all down to tweeting. I hope that's okay. Ooh, a new one in there. From Jack Sinner trying to get it in the last minute. Okay, so some tweets. So I think we have the good, the bad, and the ugly. so the bad are some tweets from Catherine O'Brien, which is literally just tweeting for the noggin. I'm sure you will win it. Don't worry, Johnny. We also have a tweet from our esteemed auditor, Catherine. This debate is lit. It's not wrong. The Good, in particular The Good Place, we have Breathe Sweet. I was actually quite disappointed by the lack of shout-outs to The Good Place, which is generally, I would feel, where most millennials go to get their philosophy knowledge, not like philosophy classes or something like, I don't know. And finally, The Ugly from Luke Valley. His tweet being, but if the afterlife doesn't exist, how am I going to activate my trap card and send you straight to the shadow realm? I feel like you need to slow down. Also to you, Breed. And also, I guess, to Kate Mayer, because she's been tweeting the most out of anyone here, and it's literally just, I fucking won this competition last year. But because you support the tweeting so much, you're going to get an Egan as well. In fact, actually, since you're up there, I don't know if I might give it to someone else. Also, as I said, anyone who tweeted gets one of these nice Maidens and Karen keep cups, and in fact, with so many of them upstairs, there is actually just one for everyone. So I actually, like, honestly, as I said, I work in finance, which means I don't really know much about like the afterlife or anything like that. So I'm not actually going to talk about the debate like that happened really. I do just want to say congratulations to you guys. Like, it is a really, and in fact to everyone who like didn't get to the final as well. Like, it is a really like difficult thing, especially when you're just starting out in college, to get up and stand in front of a group of people and speak non-stop for 7 minutes. When I did Maidens originally, way back when in first year, I didn't even make it out of the in-rounds. I didn't break to the quarterfinals or anything like that. So I'm really impressed by you guys. That's the real reason I came here, for support. You can tell I'm over it too. I will say as well, I'll say it's funny, like the last time I was at a Maidens final was 2 years ago when I was judging it. And the guy who came second now in that Maidens final, he had this opening story in his speech, which you can see I'm sitting back to tell it now. he spent a good first 3 or 4 minutes in his speech telling the story about himself and his little sister, and they were like sneaking into the house, trying to get some jamming daughters, and I honestly he thinks he came second because when we came back down and we awarded the prizes and stuff, we told him, the second half of your speech was really good. And if only it's all about content. So the second half of your speech is really good. So if he'd done that, maybe he would have won. The real reason he came second was the fact that I don't remember what the second half of the speech was. I don't even remember what the debate was. But they're so distracted. All of us were just so distracted by this great story about Jammy Dodgers, we just completely forgot what happened. We're like, fuck it, we can't let him win. But I guess we'll just give him second and then flip a coin for you. The last thing I guess I want to say is just that, I don't know if you guys, I presume you guys have seen it because you guys are in Trinity and go about the place, but this poster, you can see here, designed by Catherine O'Brien, I presume because she's cheering over there. But I've seen there's a lot going on in this poster, and you can see a lot of naked guys, maybe some girls, some anger issues going on here. So honestly, I haven't seen this much sexual tension since I last walked into the council room. Without further ado, I'm going to finish up for this evening and let you guys go back upstairs, enjoy your drinks. But before I do, I guess I'm going to move this bit out. I'd now like to call upon the auditor to announce the Society's forthcoming events.